What would you feel if one day at the gym you met a girl wearing the same rare perfume your husband gave you? This story is about female intuition, unexpected friendship, and the most creative revenge for betrayal. Get ready. Sometimes it will be funny, sometimes not so much. What I can promise for sure is that it will be very womanly. The main thing is, be patient. Boomerang. Sometimes it feels like I'm the main character in a sitcom, only without a scriptwriter and with much less humor. My husband is a man who knows how to surprise. Sometimes he forgets where he left his keys. Sometimes he suddenly decides he's a future chef and starts experimenting with spices right in the kitchen. And I'm the one who usually keeps everything under control because honestly, without that, our life would have turned into a real comedy of errors long ago. But even I couldn't have guessed that one day my life would turn into a thriller, where the main role is a fight for justice, and maybe a little revenge. And all this not because I love drama, but because sometimes to understand who you really are, you have to go through fire. Or at least a few unexpected twists of fate. They say happiness loves silence. My happiness apparently was deaf and blind, because it didn't notice the suspicious scent of someone else's perfume wandering around the apartment. But I, as a true woman, noticed everything. Even if that everything was hidden behind perfectly ironed shirts and sweet texts like, "I'll be late at work. Don't wait up." My name is Evie, and I'm that wife who always knows when her husband is lying. But like many, I preferred to pretend nothing was happening. Until one day. Until that very morning when I decided it was time to take care of myself and signed up for the gym. I came to the gym with good intentions. To lose a couple of kilos, clear my head and maybe meet new friends. But fate, as always, decided to play a joke. I was standing by the mirror trying to figure out how that damn machine worked, when I caught an unusual scent. No, not sweat or a protein shake. It was a rare, subtle, expensive fragrance I knew all too well. My husband gave me that perfume for our anniversary. He swore he picked it himself, sniffed samples for ages to find my scent. I was so touched I almost cried. And now that scent was floating in the gym, and it clearly wasn't coming from me. I turned and saw her. Tall, slim, with long hair and a perfect manicure. She was smiling at the trainer, who seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. I couldn't help but smile. Of course, women like that always make men a little dizzy. But I was interested not in the trainer, but in her perfume. I walked up to her pretending to look for a towel. She turned to me and nodded politely. "Hi. Are you new here?" she asked. "Yes, just started today," I replied, trying not to show my nerves. "Cool. I'm Freya. If you need anything, just ask. I'm practically at home here." She laughed, and I noticed her eyes were very kind. "Thanks, Freya. I'm Evie." We started talking. It turned out Freya was a designer, had recently moved to our city, and was looking for new friends. I listened but kept thinking about the perfume. I couldn't resist and asked, "Hey, your perfume is amazing. What's it called?" Freya smiled. "Oh, it's a gift. My boyfriend gave it to me. He says I'm his only one, and this scent reminds him of me." I almost choked on my water. "What a caring boyfriend," I said. "Yeah, he's like that." Freya pulled out her phone. "Look, we just went out of town for the weekend," and showed me a photo. In the photo was my husband. My husband. At that moment I realized the gym wasn't just a place to lose weight, but also for revelations. I looked at Freya, then at the photo, then back at Freya. She noticed my confusion. "Are you okay?" she asked. I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "Freya, I need to tell you something. Can we meet tomorrow?" I suggested. "Okay, sure." Freya agreed, puzzled. The next day we met at a cozy cafe near the gym. The air was filled with the aroma of fresh pastries, coffee, and a hint of tension. Freya, I began, taking a sip. There's something I have to tell you. It's important. She looked at me with curiosity and a bit of concern. What happened? She asked, smiling, but her eyes were anxious. I sighed and, gathering my thoughts, said, My husband is the guy in your photo. He's my husband. Freya froze, her eyes widened, and her face showed a mix of shock and confusion. What? She exclaimed. Are you serious? He's your husband? I thought he was just a friend or something. I smiled nervously. Exactly, I thought so too. But it turns out he's my husband. We've been together for years, and I had no idea he was living a double life. Freya closed her eyes as if trying to process what she'd heard. Then she laughed, first nervously, then genuinely. Well, that's a twist, she said, smiling through tears. And I thought I had secrets, but this is a whole drama. I felt something tighten inside, but at the same time relief. I had finally told the truth. And to my surprise, Freya didn't turn away, but instead reached out her hand. You know what, she said. We're both in the same boat. And honestly, I think it's time to teach him a lesson. A little female solidarity never hurts, right? I laughed, feeling the tension melt away. At that moment, I realized that despite all the shocking discoveries, we could become good friends, supporting each other in this tough situation. And what do you suggest? I asked, smiling. Freya squinted mischievously. Well, for example, we could give him a little surprise. Like set him up on a date with someone who can't keep secrets. We both laughed. After we laughed and cooled off a bit, Freya and I decided to continue our conversation over another cup of coffee. Time passed, and the mood became more playful and lively. We started sharing stories about men we once loved or just met, and those who disappointed us. I once decided to test how quickly men lose their composure. I texted one, I dreamed about you last night, but I can't remember what you did. He spent the whole day trying to figure out what he'd done in the dream. To another, I sent a voice message with a mysterious "we need to talk," and then disappeared for a day. He said he almost went gray in that time. I laughed, and Freya continued. And once on a date, I told a guy I was allergic to boring men. He spent the whole evening trying to be funny, and I pretended to sneeze whenever he said something dull. At the end of the night, he asked, So, is your allergy gone? I replied, Almost, but the best medicine is dessert on your tab. Freya, you're never boring. I need to take lessons from you, I said. Freya winked. Sign up. I have plenty more ideas. I nodded, adding, I had an ex who thought he was a master of surprises. Once, he decided to make me a romantic dinner and ordered food from a restaurant, but passed it off as his own cooking. I knew the most he could do was make tea. I ate in silence, praised him, and then when he went to the bathroom, I found the restaurant receipt in the trash. The next day, I ordered him delivery from the same place with a card. Thanks for the recipe, chef. Freya laughed. That's brilliant. Well, serves him right. Now he'll think twice before lying, I said, smiling. Freya, laughing, raised her coffee cup and added, You should have asked him for a master class on that dish. One day I did. I said I wanted to learn to cook his signature pasta. He got so nervous he almost boiled the pasta without water. Then he admitted he couldn't cook at all and asked if I'd be upset. I said, Honesty is more important than cooking skills. Freya nodded. See, men think they can impress us with something basic, but we already know all their tricks. I laughed. Yeah, but sometimes it's fun to play along. Let them think they're in control. Meanwhile, we enjoy the show. We laughed, realizing that our sense of humor was the best weapon against boredom and disappointing suitors. As we discussed these stories, we suddenly realized that we not only wanted revenge, but also felt truly inspired. A creative idea started forming in my mind, a masterpiece of our own. What if, I began, smiling, we come up with something unusual for him, like send him on a journey into the world of his own secrets. Let him find out what it's like to be caught red-handed when you're hiding something important. Freya smiled back. Or make him think that his secret has been uncovered, when in fact, it's just a clever trick. We started brainstorming ideas. What we came up with wasn't exactly funny, but it was definitely womanly. All we needed was a little patience. I came home. I looked at him and simply said, I know everything. I didn't throw a tantrum or make a scene as often happens. I knew that what awaited him would be something he'd remember forever, and he would recall me more than once in his life. We got divorced. However, I became someone close to him, his best friend. I convinced him that I had forgiven and understood him. Moreover, I truly began to understand how weak he was and how dependent he was on the approval of others. A few months later, he met another woman. I knew about it from the very beginning. He didn't hide that he had a new love. I didn't get jealous, didn't make a scene. On the contrary, I supported him, gave advice, helped him figure himself out. He was grateful, saying I was the only person who understood him. I smiled and thought, you have no idea how much you depend on me. I helped him build his new relationship. I was there when things didn't go well with his new partner. I listened to his complaints, gave advice, supported him. I became the headquarters of his happiness, his support, his shoulder to cry on. He got used to me always being there, to me being his emotional home base. He trusted me like no one else. Years passed. He was happy in his new relationship and I was there as a friend. I became a part of his life he couldn't do without. He called me every day, told me about his successes and failures, shared his joys and sorrows. I listened, supported, advised. I was everything to him. I knew that sooner or later the moment would come when he would be at his most vulnerable. I waited for that moment, like a hunter waits for their prey. I watched his life, his relationships, his happiness. I saw how he became more and more dependent on me, how his new wife started to get annoyed by our communication. I knew she couldn't compete with me, even though I wasn't after his love. And then, when he was completely immersed in his new love, I hired a man to start flirting with his wife. Everything was subtle, careful, but enough to arouse suspicion. I chose someone who knew how to be charming, attentive, but not pushy. He started showing up in the same places as her, accidentally running into her, starting conversations. At first, she didn't pay attention, but then she began to respond to his flirting. I subtly hinted to my ex about his wife's strange behavior. I dramatized the situation, added fuel to the fire. I was there when he suffered, supported him, told him it wasn't his fault, that she was the bad one. I reminded him that good men act like gentlemen, pay alimony, and leave bad wives with just a suitcase. I even let him stay at my place during the divorce, just as a friend, of course, nothing romantic. When they divorced, he was devastated. He lost everything. His wife, his home, his self-confidence. Only I remained, his only support, his lifeline. I took him in, helped him pack his things, supported him when he cried at night. I was there when he couldn't sleep, when he felt bad, when he felt unwanted. I became everything to him. I saw how he clung to me, hoping I would become something more to him again. He became dependent on my opinion, my support, my presence in his life. I was all he had left. He tried to find comfort in work, friends, random flings, but nothing helped. He always came back to me, as if I was his last island of stability. I listened to his complaints, supported him, advised him. I was everything to him. But inside I already knew it would all end soon. I waited for the moment when he would finally break, when he would realize that without me he was nobody. And then one day I invited him to a coffee shop. We sat at a table by the window, rain falling outside. He talked about his life, complained about fate, said he didn't understand why everything was so bad. I listened, nodded, smiled. And then I calmly said, "Listen, it's all your own fault. Because you're a moral degenerate and a traitor. You don't deserve happiness and you'll never have it. No one needs you. Swim in the mess you created yourself. And never show up in my life again." He looked at me in confusion, then in horror. He couldn't believe it was me saying this, his only friend, his support, his salvation. I stood up, put on my coat, took my bag and left. He was left alone. At home, his suitcase was waiting by the door. The locks were changed, his number was blocked. When I left, I really left. I didn't feel joy or anger. I only felt relief. I was no longer a victim. I became the master of my own life. I realized that revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life, but about restoring your own. I no longer depended on him, didn't wait for his calls, didn't hope for his love. I was free. I don't know what happened to him after that. Maybe he found someone else, maybe he stayed alone. It doesn't matter to me anymore. I did what I had to do. I got myself back. Years passed. Life went on, new habits, new faces, new cities. I no longer thought about the past. It became a part of me, but it no longer defined my present. One day, coming back from a business trip, I decided to stop by my favorite coffee shop. There, at a table by the window, I saw a familiar silhouette, Freya. She had hardly changed. Still confident, with a sincere smile and that look in her eyes that always held a little more understanding than people expected. "Evie!" Freya jumped up and hugged me so tightly, as if we hadn't seen each other for years, not just a few days. "You can't imagine how happy I am to see you." We ordered coffee, and the conversation flowed naturally. I told her everything, openly, honestly, about how after our first meeting I didn't just survive the betrayal, but turned it into my personal triumph. About how I became everything to my ex-husband and then nothing. About how revenge turned out not to be sweet but liberating. Freya listened attentively, never interrupting. Sometimes her eyes widened, sometimes she laughed, sometimes she squeezed my hand. "Evie," she finally said, "if someone had told me such a story, I wouldn't have believed it. But you were always stronger than you seemed. And honestly, I'm proud of you. Not because you got revenge, but because you managed to break out of that cycle. You didn't just survive. You became yourself." I smiled, feeling the last lump in my throat dissolve. "Thank you, Freya. Without you, without that meeting at the gym, I probably wouldn't have dared to change. You became not just a friend, but a reminder. We write our own scripts." Freya laughed. "Well, if anything, I'm always up for new adventures. Just this time, no husbands, okay?" We laughed just like in that cafe back then. "Did you ever regret it?" Freya suddenly asked, looking at me intently. I thought for a moment. No. It was scary, it was painful, but regret? No. I lived in illusions for too long. Sometimes I think I was avenging not just him but myself for the years I spent waiting and hoping. But now I'm free. And that's what matters. Freya nodded. "I understand you. After all that, I changed too. After our first meeting, I couldn't believe it was real for a long time. It felt like I was caught in some absurd whirlwind, where everything was upside down. But then I realized, sometimes life throws us into these situations so we finally learn to be honest with ourselves." I smiled. "Remember how we came up with revenge plans?" Freya asked, grinning slyly. I laughed. "Of course. You suggested sending him on a date with a girl who can't keep her mouth shut." Freya laughed. And in the end it turned out even better. You didn't just teach him a lesson. You showed him what it means to be truly alone. I nodded. Sometimes I think revenge isn't about hurting someone, but about showing them what it feels like to be betrayed, just as I was. Freya sighed. Yes, but the main thing is not to get stuck in that feeling. For example, after all that, I realized I want to be happy not out of spite, but just for myself. I smiled. That's how I feel too. Now I live for myself. And you know, it's amazing to wake up in the morning and not worry that someone might betray you. Just to live, just to be. What now? Freya asked. What are your plans? I thought for a moment. I want to travel. I always dreamed of seeing Italy, learning to cook real pasta, walking the streets of Rome. And I want to try something new. Maybe start my own business. Or write a book. About us, for example. Freya laughed. Oh, that would be a bestseller. For sure. I winked. Definitely. And you? What are your dreams? Freya thought for a moment. I want to learn how to dance. I've always dreamed of it, but I was too shy. Now I think, why not? I also want to get a dog. And maybe someday meet the right person, not perfect but truly mine. I smiled. I'm sure you'll succeed. We both deserve happiness. Freya nodded. Yes, we've been through a lot. But now we have the most important thing. We have ourselves. We stayed in the coffee shop until evening. We reminisced about the past, laughed, sometimes felt a little sad. We talked about men, about work, about life. I felt lighter with every hour, as if I had finally let go of everything that had held me back for so many years. You know, Evie, Freya said, I always thought real friendship is when you can go years without seeing each other, and then meet and pick up the conversation as if there was never a pause. I nodded. You're right. We're like two sides of the same coin. We went through similar things but stayed true to ourselves. Freya smiled. And I realized that women's intuition is not a myth. If it weren't for that scent of perfume at the gym, maybe we would never have met. I laughed. See, even betrayal can lead to something good. When we left the coffee shop, the rain had already stopped. The air was fresh, smelling of wet asphalt and hope. We walked down the street, chatting about little things, and I suddenly felt that I was no longer afraid of the future. Freya, I said. Thank you. For everything. She hugged me. And thank you. For your honesty, your courage, your friendship. We went our separate ways, but I knew. Now I had not only a past but also a future. And in that future I am the main character of my own life. Now I look to the future with ease and optimism. A new life is not just a chance to start over, but an opportunity to become a little wiser, a little more cheerful, and most importantly, a little more confident. So my dears, if you ever face betrayal or something that feels like the end of the world, don't rush to be upset. Better turn it into a bright show, and let it be remembered for a long time. Sometimes I think this whole story isn't just about betrayal and revenge. It's about growing up, about accepting yourself, about how important it is not to lose your dignity, even when it feels like your world is falling apart. We often think happiness depends on others, on a loved one, on family, on friends. But in reality, happiness is an inner state that no one can give or take away except ourselves. I realize that forgiveness is not weakness but strength. To forgive means to let go of the past, to stop being its hostage. Revenge can bring brief relief, but true freedom comes only when you no longer hold a grudge, no longer wait for apologies, no longer hope for someone else's remorse. You just live for yourself, for your dreams, for your future. Women's intuition, women's solidarity, women's friendship. These are powerful forces. Sometimes one meeting, one honest conversation can change your whole life. We are capable of supporting each other, inspiring, helping each other get back up after a fall. And if, even through pain and disappointment, we find the strength to smile, it means we've already won. Now I know no betrayal, no treachery can destroy someone who has learned to love and respect herself. Everything that happens to us is experience that makes us stronger. And if one day you find yourself at a crossroads, having to choose between revenge and freedom, choose freedom. It always leads to happiness. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments what you think about women's intuition, friendship, and revenge. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your stories.